Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Sunday Night Medicine Sessions. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Remy and I am one of the founding council members of Medicine Festival. I'm also a strategic impact coach, a systemic and an executive coach, and my focus is on women's empowerment and women's leadership. So I'm deeply passionate about women and human transformation. And so I'm really delighted to have such a wonderful group of women on the show tonight to explore the rise of the feminine. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful speakers. So first, Alexandra Feldner.
Hi.
Hi, Alexandra, how are you?
I'm fine, very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
Oh, great. So just to tell you a little bit about Alexandra. So in 2016, you initiated and co-founded FemmeQ with the aim of raising awareness around feminine qualities, I should say, feminine intelligence, that's so needed in the 21st century and particularly 21st century leadership. And I mean, now more than ever, we see this really playing out, don't we, in terms of female leaders around the world, particularly at this time, this global pandemic, during the global pandemic, where we see female leaders applauded for their decisive and compassionate leadership. Denmark, Finland, Taiwan, Germany, to name a few. So I digress, but it's important just to sort of put a pin in it in a way, because this is something that you've been talking about for quite some years. And over the last 4 years at FemmeQ, you produced 3, I think, international events: Berlin, London, and LA. Many short films around the topic of the rising feminine, and we're going to show you one of those in just a second. And also, Alexandra is deeply committed to inner work. So she organises circles to help women who are often limited, self-imposed limitations, often working through those self-imposed limitations in order that they can rise and they can shine. And you also founded Shine Your Light, which is a boutique creative agency for change makers and social impact organizations, supporting people to discover their own power, their greatness, define their vision and their mission in the world for their offering. So welcome, Alexandra.
Exactly. Thanks very much. Yeah.
And next, Karen Downs. Karen, hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Remy. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us.
Absolute pleasure. So, Karen, you've worked for for 3 decades nearly as an entrepreneur, a change agent, a healer, a social entrepreneur, and an activist. Karen is the founder of the Flourish Initiative. She's also the co-founder of FemmeQ, as well as a member of Catalyst 2030, which addresses the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In addition, Karen is a successful businesswoman. You built several companies, but in the 80s founded and built an alternative healthcare enterprise from the tabletop, which became a global success story, and worked with women in several countries, I believe. And you've also long supported civil society and organisations to transform entrenched cultural norms and advise business leaders in development programmes around the world. So we're really grateful that we've got your breadth of experience on gender equality and also your knowledge on how we build more human-centric organisations for us to flourish as a human race and a planet, which is a topic incredibly dear to all of our hearts here at Medicine Festival. And last but certainly not least, Anna Haber. Anna is an experienced Kundalini yoga teacher and a meditation teacher. Anna has been training with different tantric teachers and masters for many years and is a skilled practitioner and space holder, and has also trained in biodynamic trauma release breathwork and conscious touch. And as a devotee and long-term student of shamanism, Anna, you've been learning from different indigenous elders and wisdom keepers about different ways of knowing and being. Anna now holds retreats and workshops throughout the year with master teachers and healers from different modalities around the world. But I wanted to add that before, Anna, you started your career, you worked for 2 decades in the international gemstone industry, raising the profile of sustainability practices to help support and grow artisans within Indigenous communities. And so I think that's also fascinating that you've held those two spaces, and that interplay between Indigenous wisdom and feminine wisdom is really showing up for all of us at Medicine Festival as we seek to explore and find some more answers to some of these epic questions and challenges of our time. So with that, welcome, Anna.
Thank you, Renee.
So I think before we go to the film, it's probably important to say or to qualify that the purpose of tonight's specific inquiry is to discuss and reflect on the rise of the feminine and the significant role and the potential of feminine wisdom and the part that it can play in bringing the medicine or being the medicine for people and planet at this time, which is everybody who knows Medicine Festival knows that is at the heart of our inquiry. And so I love the way you will talk about this emergence of this new consciousness where the deepest instincts of the heart in both men and women, so compassion, inclusivity, listening, longing to protect, longing to heal, are central to this deep feminine intelligence, FemmeQ. And now, given that that is our focus for this evening, this feminine intelligence and feminine rising, I think it's also important to state that before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the existence of a broad spectrum of genders, and that gender is simply binary, man, woman, and of course these feminine qualities are present in all genders and sex, but this is Women's Month, and so we are focusing on women and these particular aspects of womanhood. I think with that, I would like to share the short film called Today I Rise, if that's okay, Zach. Put that up for us. Thank you. I'm struggling to
Little girl with broken wings but full of hope. Where are you? Wise woman covered in moss. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Today is the day I will not sit still and give in anymore. Today I rise. I am bruised, but I will get up and walk again. Today I rise. I don't care if you ignore my beauty. Today I rise. Through the alchemy of my darkest nights, I heal and thrive. Today I rise. Today I rise. I move through the world with confidence and grace. I open my eyes and I am ready to face my wholeness as a woman and my limitless capacity. I will walk my path with audacity. Today I rise. I reconnect with the many aspects of myself. I'm in awe of the reality I can create. I am a queen. I am a healer, a wise woman, a wild woman. I will rise and be. I am a rebel. I will wake up and fight. I am a mother and I am a child. I will no longer disguise my sadness and pain. I will no longer suffer and complain. I am black and I am white. There's no reason to hide. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? call upon Kali to kiss me alive. I transform my anger into power. No more heartache or strife. The world is missing what I am ready to give. My wisdom, my sweetness, my love, and my happiness. And the rivers and the earth in distress. I rise and shine, and am ready to go on my quest. Today I rise without doubt or hesitation. Today I rise without excuses, without procrastination. Today I call upon my sisters to join a movement of resoluteness and concern. Today is my call to action. I will fulfill my mission without further distraction. Today is the day. Today I will start to offer the world the wisdom of my heart.
So beautiful. Thank you so much. And
yeah, I would like to say something maybe quickly about that film.
Yeah,
we originally produced it, me and my co-director Agatha, for the first FemmeQ event in Berlin, and we were really like excited to show it to 300 people. But then it went viral and traveled around the world. And I think the film in itself showed where women are standing today, because it has more than 3 million views now. And the most incredible thing which happened was that at the election of Trump, it had like 2,000 or 3,000 views every day. But then at the night after Trump was elected, it jumped from 2,000 views a day to 40,000 and stayed that way for the first 2 weeks after the election. And we had so many emails from so many women all around the world. So I think what it actually did is it answered a deep longing of women to really rise and do something about the state of the world. So it was not intended to be that way, but it was then an incredible invitation and an incredible dialogue, I would say, with the collective, the feminine collective in the world.
Amazing. This was such a beautiful film. Thank you for sharing that. And actually, you know, we talked a little bit about where does one begin when we think about the feminine rising, feminine intelligence. It's such an enormous subject, and one that we all meet in very different ways. And so when, you know, we thought it would be a beautiful way to set the context and set the question, particularly that question, where are you, you know, which we will all be answering very differently. But it afforded us an opportunity to also figure out where we'd come from, you know, and how relevant actually touching into those historical moments is also at this time, because of course it enables us to continually evolve, chart our progress, inspire others with those actions that have come before, and also hopefully inspire and galvanize more women to rise. So with that, Alex, I'm just wondering whether you could take us through, I know we've got an hour or so, so it might be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but take us through a little bit perhaps of the history, you know, how we actually got here.
I would like to ask Zach, who's hopefully listening to me, to not show only my face, because if I talk to myself, it's very irritating. I would prefer to talk to the three of you, if that is okay. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously too short to go into the full history. But in my job as a creative director, I did what I'm doing now, and which is also a result of FemmeQ, is that I saw, with my background in film and advertising, I saw that many women are not really represented in an equally interesting way in the world. So I had this longing to sort of use my creativity bring women forward and to show, to make them stand more taller in their mission and in their vision. And one of the beautiful women I had the honor to work with is a historian and Jungian psychoanalyst, Anne Baring. And she dedicated her life to study the history of women, which has been forgotten in the history telling, which most people probably know. But while I was reading her book, The Dream of the Cosmos, I really had this sort of shift myself in consciousness where I realized that the great mother and the feminine was so honored for 25,000 years, which is a very, very long time. And already like something like 30,000 years BC, they found cave paintings where it was obvious that the cosmos was feminine, that the earth was feminine, that the animals were born out of the womb of the feminine and would go back into the feminine to be reborn again. So there was this incredible honoring of everything which has to do with the feminine, which is productive and which gives birth and which is the unseen and which is the whole unseen cosmos, the whole sort of psychic abilities of women and the instinct and all of that. And it was so honored. And my own shift in consciousness was that I all of a sudden realized that we were simply sort of born in this tiny window of time where we were conditioned in a different way. But for thousands and thousands of years, this was not normality. It was normality that there were the spirits of the trees and the spirits of the stars, and it was a completely different sort of scenario. And I then became very passionate to, talk to women about it and to say, we have to know our history a little bit better so that we can adjust and align and also take action in how we can rise and maybe claim back what belonged to us in the first place. And there's so many, and then I read about Mary Magdalene, that she was actually a priestess and had royal ancestry and, was a Syrian, incredible, proud woman, and I mean, all these women of Fatima, the wife of Mohammed, was also like an incredible entrepreneur. She was 40 when she met him, when they came together, and the whole sort of, and supported him. He was 20 years younger than her. She was an entrepreneur, and she had her children, and she supported him. And so it's just this incredible situation that we were just forgotten in the history books. And then the Catholic Church stepped in. And another thing I learned through Anne Baring's book was how badly women are talked about in the Bible, and that we are defective and evil and sinful. And so I think it then turned into what we have today. And so yes, it was a very, for me also, a big discovery to see where this actually comes from. And I think we all need to know where this comes from, that we know now that this cannot continue. We have to claim our rights back.
And just, it's so fascinating, isn't it, to think about the different contexts of, the heads of these ancient mystery schools that were women, these entrepreneurs, and that women, as far as Egypt to Mesopotamia and Greece and beyond, and these multiple roles, including trading and entrepreneurship that, we had as heads of schools and, I use the term lightly, but churches and families and the matriarchal system. So yeah, it's
well, the whole spirituality was our domain, and we owned the land and took care of the community. So I think leadership was very much leadership, and leading the community was very much our domain, and it obviously worked.
Yeah,
and it's part of who we are, interconnected as in the feminine collective.
Yeah.
Can I just pick up from there, Remy, from Alexandra?
Yes, I was just actually going to turn to
I'm
very
conscious of the...
that you want to tap into and speak to, because these moments, there are many moments that have changed a lot for women over the course of history. And so, I mean, you know, as I said, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but yes, by all means do.
Thank you. I was very struck, Alexandra, as you just said about leadership. You were both speaking about leadership, and I think if we go back in time, that was not considered a word. Women would not have been thought of as leaders per se, because a leader suggests that you have a follower. But there's something much more communal and something much more holistic about how women placed themselves in a community. They did commune. They did bring together. They did hold social and cultural systems together so that livelihood could flourish. And because that's such a big word for me of flourishing, is that if I look back in time, as you said, Alexandra, something was taken away through a system that was perpetuated by men, and then we get into gender, and unfortunately that is what we have to talk about as well, because one of the things that we've all discussed together is there's a spectrum. You can speak about feminine intelligence and consciousness in the context of our global north, but if you go to the global south, where I personally work with in the villages with women in India and Bangladesh, we have to speak about gender. We have to speak about the violation of women, and we have to speak about what never gets spoken about. And I think that is what, because of violence, because of positioning and hierarchy, and these notions of superiority that were introduced mostly through the churches, as you said, Alexandra, that women have had to rise and fight and use their position or their retaliation or come up against men to get their place back. And those moments in time, like the suffragettes in 1923, it was the first time that the Equal Rights Amendment was mentioned, which is when the suffragettes rose and we got the vote. But it's not until 1979 that the Equal Rights Amendment actually landed for ratification in the United States. And these moments in time where women have said enough is enough, we need our place in society to hold place, to hold community, to hold livelihood and regeneration of life and the flourishing of life has been so critical. And I was sharing with you all, there's a fabulous series on at the moment called Mrs. America that depicts Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedman, fighting for human or equal rights. That was not just women, that was also minorities, that was also race, that was also the gay and the liberation of all of people having equal rights. And I think there's been these moments in time. The Me Too campaign is another one. But I think it's so critical that I personally feel, as we all do, and this has been our conversation, is this is our time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Yeah. And I feel like this is our time to reveal, the COVID-19 has revealed the way we're working isn't working. Yeah. And we've had these series of crises, and this is another moment in time where we have to take the opportunity to take up what crisis offers us, whether it's in a health condition or what we're dealing with in the pandemic. A crisis offers the opportunity for transformation, and if we don't take it, the moment will be gone. We have to take it. I think that's a very important point, Karen, and you know, we've talked about this a bit, and just, you know, to take the opportunity, but also to look how and remind ourselves of how women have historically taken those opportunities, because that's incredibly inspiring when you think about, and you just look around and see, you know, it's not unfair to say it's the women that are healing, that are restoring, that are rebuilding our communities, our governments, our organisations, society. And as you were talking about the Equal Rights Amendment in the 70s, and I was only reading just 24 hours ago about, you know, the number of young girls that played such a significant role in the civil rights protests. Just reading about a group called the Leesburg Stockade Girls, who were girls as young as 12 and 15, who were unlawfully imprisoned for over a month in 1963. But they were an incredible example of the female freedom fighters who helped enable
one of the biggest, the greatest legal assaults on racism, right? The Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it was because of, well, you know, their contribution and the coverage that that story got was pivotal. And so I think exactly as you say, it's the opportunity to take the transformation, but also this remembering of the capability of what we're capable of, you know, when we stand up and when we fight, when we rise. And I agree with you. I think it feels like one of those moments again, as you say, this global pandemic and COVID-19, for us, this needs to drop in more to this feminine, to this deeper mystery, this listening, and many other attributes. And I was going to ask you, Anna, perhaps to share a few of your reflections around that at this time, because I know this is work that you're very interested in too.
Yeah, I mean, we're in such unprecedented times, and I feel across the world, which has never happened before, we've been forced into a feminine space, whether we like it or not. We've literally been pushed back into our wombs, our homes, and with nowhere to run to, no place. We can't avoid ourselves anymore. We have to face ourselves, and I think it's been so interesting because the feminine principles, which are very much around deep listening and not doing, about being, and so much of it is about sitting in the unknown, in uncertainty, in the uncomfortableness, and not acting, but just sitting in that place of uncertainty and being with it, and being present actually to whatever is moving through. So yeah, it feels like to me it's really been an incubation period, and we've all been forced to really look at what is working in our lives, what is not working in our lives, and not necessarily been able to act on it, but we've just had to observe and witness it. And I really think this time has brought a deep, incredible process for so many of us to be confronted with our shadows that need to be integrated at this time. And I thought it's quite interesting because I was just looking into corona and what it actually means. And corona means crown. So it's actually representing sovereignty. And viruses are associated with the water element. But it's when the water element represents the feminine and emotions. But in this case, it would symbolize that the water element is out of balance.
Right.
Where in the feminine are we out of balance, which is showing up in this water element? And interestingly, we know that corona comes from bats, and bats are they live in colonies that are run by matriarchy. They're run by females. So this is just a question I bring today, that is it women's medicine that has brought corona to our world for an initiation, for a deep soul initiation? And this is just an inquiry I was looking into myself and just wanted to bring today as a question.
That's an epic question.
Well, yeah, I know that
it has been an epic question for an epic time. I totally hear you. I think it has been this incredibly, deeply, deeply challenging for so many people, and yet, because it's shaken us to our core, to our root. It's sort of unearthed the sediment in a lot of us, and as you said, it's forced us to be in the uncertainty, to look at ourselves, to be with ourselves, to look at our shadows and integrate. But I guess, and so I agree with you fully. I'm just wondering how other women might be experiencing it, because I think, that we're all at different phases and stages in terms of how and what this is showing up for us. And perhaps, the feminine aspect of this, if we choose to look at that for coronavirus and all that it represents, it sort of makes me think about how might we make our femininity more conscious at this time. I wonder whether that's something that you might want to touch into, and actually what does that mean? Because we're all having such different lived experiences as women, and I'm not even overlaying then cultural nuance, race, privilege, etc., which we can also dig into.
I mean, I'm personally very aware that we're speaking, well, myself, from a perspective of privilege. But for me, I would say that, actually, I'll let Karen go first, because I think my point will come after.
Well, I love what we're saying, and I want to really underscore. I've been sitting in conversations for the last 2 weeks, from South Africa to India to Bangladesh to Tunisia. I've been privileged to be in some amazing conversations with some amazing women, and all things are not equal. And so we can speak about feminine intelligence, but I'm also present to the fact that there was something like 58,000 rape cases. If we're going to talk about statistics, we also have to speak about gender and the implications on gender. 58,000 rape cases that were reported in England in the last year, and 1,700 of them went to trial. The escalation of domestic violence, 26 women have been killed in lockdown in England alone by their partner, by their oppressor. So I think we have to, it's such a big conversation, the conversation of the feminine and the privilege that we have to be able to speak about reflection and time to reflect. And I'm with you, Anna, totally. And I think the capacity of the feminine has to be that we include our sisters, because part of me feels if we all don't make it, none of us will. But it's like, how do we embrace, how do we hold, how do we protect these women that don't have our privilege, that don't have our voice, that are subjected to these atrocities? The girls in India are being sent back to their villages, and the prediction is they'll never return to education again. So I'm not saying that is a plea for pity. I'm saying it for a plea for acknowledging all our circumstances are not equal, and all our capacities and privileges that we have. Can we really hold the space for all women to be included and be present to the collective trauma, the suffering, and how do we respond to that? That's a big question for me. How do I hold that when I hear those statistics? Because it breaks my heart, honestly.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do about it. But every day I'll take another action. And I just think, whether it's my own introspection, as you said, Anna, I have to look at not the fight. I can't go out and fight anymore. There's no more fighting. But how do we have the men also recognise that the feminine in their lives, in their being, is so critical to saving the planet, to saving our livelihoods? So I think it's so important that we really look at the spectrum.
Absolutely. I think it's again another very important point, and it speaks to me, at least as I hear that, which is the question that I hold myself, which is what is our responsibility when we look at what we're gifted with as our privilege and our our very, very drastically different circumstances. That's what I'm asking. How can we experience this intelligence when we're coming at it from such different corners of the globe, cultural influence, socio-demographics, all of that, and yet there feels, to me at least, to be a real sense of responsibility. And I'm curious to hear how you feel about that sort of sense of responsibility, because how do we support, how do we partner, which is, I'm hearing these resounding questions, it's something that we're talking about a lot, but also how do we maintain that responsibility, because it's an important piece here, I think.
Who wants to answer that question?
Go for it, Alexandra.
I don't know if I mean, what comes to mind is that, what was interesting in our conversations around feminine intelligence between Berlin and London and Los Angeles, obviously very different cultures, was that we opened the conversation to say, okay, what is actually missing in the equation? What qualities are missing? What is really, what is the intelligence of the feminine all about. And I don't know if you want to say something about Los Angeles, Karen, but it was like, that was our last big event, and it was incredible. I think it is an important conversation because we have so adjusted to the status quo that I thought at one point we are like in a kind of a trance, you know, that we just accept that certain, even the whole emotional realm is not even valued. You know, everything is so out of control. I mean, it's I've just come out of a 3-day men's group where we were talking about vulnerability and all the more sort of tender places where men can go to, and it was such a great reminder that you know, obviously we do harm to women and we do harm to men, you know, by just ignoring all of that. And I don't know, Karen, yeah.
I think one of the things, Alexandra, that came out of our summits was that I started inquiring about womb intelligence. And because I was asking the scientist, what's his name? I can't think of his name. He's a real
Rupert Sheldrake.
Thank you. Yes. And I was in his workshop, thank you. And I asked him, if all cells have an intelligence, is there womb intelligence? And he said, he looked at me surprised and he went, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're onto something. And I really stuck with this question for a couple of years, and we posed it at the summit in Los Angeles. And one of the things that came out of it is a film called In Utero, and part of that film, In Utero, was the system of the womb that actually feeds the babe in terms of its impulses and impressions that it comes into the world with. And we talked about stem cells and we talked about biology, because then that is women. That's not feminine intelligence, that's women. And then what I listened to recently was a TED Talk where a woman was speaking. She was a transgender woman, and she said, I actually have a view of both worlds. And it was an amazing TED Talk saying, I identify as a woman, but biologically I have no idea what you deal with. And I think there's such a profound respect of, yes, of course you can call yourself woman, and there is biology that gives something of the rhythm and flow. And I know this is so much your domain, Anna, is when we work with rhythm and flow and seasons and our menstrual cycle and womb intelligence. All of these things never get, because they're very private, they never get spoken about what our body actually knows. We are agents of life-giving force on the planet.
And actually it's just a sort of beautiful how interconnected that makes us, just that dialogue, because instantly we share something that's so intimate, that holds so much wisdom, that is a cycle that's seasonal, and also spiritual, so sacred, you know, is that the shedding of the womb lining and the rebuilding, and it's true, yet, you know, it's not your normal course conversation.
And then we call what we use sanitary napkins. It's like it's something that's dirty and we have to sanitize it. It's like, how did that happen?
And the problem with that is, you know, and we laugh as women, well, one can laugh as a woman, but you know, these topics then get co-opted with a male overlay around how people are responding to or receiving us as women. But actually, we probably aren't having enough of those conversations about what's really going on for us in those times, and then how that shifts and changes when you go into that next phase of menopause, and what that brings in terms of, I mean, Indigenous culture looks as, well, not some Indigenous cultures really speak about the wisdom of that time for a woman, how one moves into this ebb and flow of life where suddenly you're a lot more relaxed about who you are in that space and place. And yet, even in our culture now, it's something that fascinates me, you know, the absolute absence of talk around the menopause. When you look at the working population in America and Britain alone, you know, and the number of women who are at that age of menopause, but yet there is no conversation around it in the workplace. It's, you know, it's still a dirty word. So yeah, I mean, gosh. I mean,
And I think we're taught to override our bodies, or we have been.
Yeah.
And obviously that's changing now. And especially younger women, I feel like they're really showing us the way as a different generation, because they're so much more informed and they're so much wiser about their cycles. And I learned so much. I have like reverse mentors with young women who I'm learning from about my cycles. And it was so interesting. I was at Schumacher College for a while, and I had a teacher, Pat McCabe, who is quite well known.
Wonderful.
And an incredible speaker. And she said when she joined a company, she asked for days off when she was bleeding, and they actually allowed it. And it was incredible that she had the confidence to actually say, it is not right for me to work at this time. This is a very sacred time, and I need to be still and use this time well in order to connect and channel and to bring in information. This is not a time for going to work.
And I just sort of noticed when you said that, I felt a real sort of grief around how late that realization came to me in my life, you know, when I think I'm probably nearing a point in my life where, you know, my cycles are soon to be over, I'd imagine, in the next sort of 5 years. And I wanted to go back to the point you made, I can't remember who made it, that might have been Anna, about indigenous wisdom and the waters and the feminine energy, because we've talked a bit about how indigenous wisdom also speaks to the protection, the need to protect women in the seen and the unseen realms, specifically from dark forces. And I'm not just talking about shamanic dark forces, I'm talking about dark forces as the oppression of the voice of women. And I'm just curious to know what your thinking is around that.
Well, I think there have been for thousands of years many forces at play that are seen and that are unseen and seen and non-physical, and they have an interest in keeping the feminine repressed, the feminine principle repressed. And that means a disconnection from nature and disconnection from our inner knowing. It makes us dependent on logic. So I think as women now, as consciousness is rising, I think we are really becoming more aware of these forces at play, and we feel it in our bodies. We're becoming, I feel anyway, from many women that I speak to, more sensitive and more aware of, okay, this doesn't feel right. I've overridden this way too many times, but there's something here in my body that's telling me, that's giving me information. And we've got so much information in our bodies. And I think it's really about learning to listen to the intuition that we hold at this time. And I think that's part of what we're being called forth to do, is to read. And I think that's how the feminine really comes through each one of us, is through our internal shifts, through our bodies. It's coming down. I feel we've been so focused on the mind and the masculine mind for thousands of years now, and it's been good, it's been bad, it's brought gifts, it's brought challenges. But now is the time where we need to bring this energy back down into our hearts, into our bodies, into our feelings. And it feels like a moment of deep forgiving for all that's been out of alignment. And really bringing unconditional love to all of it, including this misaligned masculine, even within the feminine. So, yeah, it's such an interesting and a time of really becoming aware again of what we hold in our bodies, and learning how to integrate and move from this more aligned place. And for me, that is where the feminine comes in. It comes down and into our bodies. And I think for each one of us, we all have our part to play in calling it forth.
And I'd love to hear from either you, Alexandra, or you, Karen, in terms of how do we have faith in our perceptions, as Anna's describing? How do we know how to sense make, to feel safe to feel? How can we help each other to do that? I'm sure that's I'm sure you both have wonderful opinions about that. So just, Karen, perhaps you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Shall I pick up from there? And then Alexandra, the thing that you're speaking about, Anna, is so true to my system. And then when I go into certain contexts, I have to speak differently. And I think our agility to be able to speak to the audience is now critical, and more critical than ever before. Because if I go into a corporate environment and say what I believe to be true and what I could align with you on, Anna, I would be thrown out. And then it's my choice as to whether I work there or not, of course. But all of us on together, and Alexandra in particular, you watched me go through and present a program to major commercial airlines. 1,600 of their leaders went through the program. And I started the program saying, has anyone here experienced a season of the soul, a winter of the soul? Now, I didn't speak about the feminine. I spoke about seasons. I spoke about what we move through, the transitions of our life, and everybody just softened in the room. And I said, you know, the days that you don't want to get out from underneath the duvet, you've lost a partner, you've lost a loved one, you're dealing with a set of circumstances. Everyone knew what a winter of the soul was. But I knew I could get away with it because of the context that I was speaking into. I didn't have to speak about the feminine. So for me, flourishing is how I get away with talking about the feminine, because if the best example of flourishing is Mother Earth. But I think to your point, Anna, it's so critical that we can hold our own. And one of the things that, you know, the four of us have talked about is this notion that I know I've experienced very strongly recently with a man that I was in a communication with, in a team with, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was that I was feeling in my body. I was like, it's something he says. It's not that he's abusing me, but it's something he does. And I was talking to a colleague about it, and she said, that's called gaslighting. I was like, oh, my God. And I looked up the term, and I don't know if anyone's ever researched that term, but it comes from a play, a British play in 1938, where a man was trying to manipulate his wife through psychological means to convince her she was insane. And we've got to call this out, because when someone says to me, get over it, what are you making a mountain out of a molehill? What are you talking about? And even in this program, we were called tree huggers or a cult because we were using these phrases. And our narrative and our language has to change. And we should push back on this notion in corporates and in business, in leaders, where they say we don't value what can't be measured. Well, I can't measure my intuition. I can't measure the stories and the movement and the expressions that come through me. I can't measure them. So therefore, they're not valuable. We've got to get past this system of rationale, logic, as you said, Anna, and measurement, because it's not what is measured we value. I can't measure the growth of a tree. I can't predict how it's going to flourish as long as I nurture it and tend to it. And so I think that this notion of gaslighting, we've got to call everyone out around us when we feel like we're being manipulated, or what's the term? I think I looked up the definition. It's manipulate someone by psychological means into doubting their own sanity.
And you know, and that's a, you know, that I'm sure that occurs on a continuum of extremes in a way. You know, it's the subtleties and the more obvious situations. But you know, I can certainly think of.
I see it all the time in corporate.
I mean, yeah, absolutely, and again, this coming back to how do we fortify each other in our experience, that collective experience, so that we can stand together and say, actually, that is a thing and it's unacceptable. Alexandra, would you like to comment?
Yeah, but I would only like to comment and give it right back to Karen, because actually I met Karen because she gave. With our other co-founder, Silla Elworthy, a beautiful seminar called Inner Action. Was it Inner Action? Yeah. And, you know, I think where we all came together in FemmeQ was that we were really saying, okay, one thing is to open the conversation, raise awareness, and, you know, make sure that more and more people talk about it and become aware of it. But what we are all passionate about is really to take action. And thanks to Karen, I got more familiar with the work of Joanna Macy. And then when we came together to found FemmeQ and talked about what is important to us, what was most important to us was that we all stand up and take a stand and go out there and do something about it, because talking about it is obviously only step one. So do you want to talk, Karen, about the triangle?
Well, I think
about whatever.
Remy or Anna, you probably know Joanna Macy's work. One of the things that she said is to move from the industrial growth society to a life-sustaining future, we need three things. And that's what we based FemmeQ on, was this triangle. We need change the systems and policies. We need to take direct action, which is the Me Too movement or Extinction Rebellion, or we have to protest. And most importantly, we have to do the inner work. The inner work for our own healing, where we've been traumatized and violated, where we haven't recovered from our own sense and we go out into the world angry in retaliation. We have to do that inner work. And that was Joannas Triangle. And she was my mentor, and I trained with her, and many thousands of people are doing her work around the work and the work that reconnects. And I think it's such important work where we recognize as women is we have those three capacities for profoundly. We have positions of power where we can change structures, systems and policies, do it now. And some of us may or may not be in the protests, but wherever we can support those who are willing to put themselves on the front line and to do the inner work of transformation, to put it into action, as you said, Alexandra. It's so important that the inner work we do is so critical in our own lives and in the environments we work in.
Yeah. And it's such a helpful reminder of her work, actually, the sort of three key pillars, and how by doing that inner work, even the activism is not angry activism, because we can come from our hearts. So, whilst there is a huge amount of grief and anger unfolding, we just look at, the one can take a stance, whether it's within XR or Black Lives Matter or whatever the movement, we can take a stance because we've healed. We've healed trauma that, when left unhealed, just gets reactivated, I guess, particularly in these situations and scenarios.
Can I share something, Remy? Just one more thing on that. I had the privilege of meeting Joanna. She's now in her early 90s, and I saw her last year in California, and I had spent the afternoon with her. And we were talking about, and she said to me, there will be a collapse, Karen. We are going into a collapse. This is way before the virus. And she said, and there's no escaping it. There's no going around it. We have to find a way to hold ourselves resilient and to go through it. And then I'm feeling, I felt my energy go right down. And then she looked at me and she just had this big grin on her face. And she said, but you were born for this time. Where else would you be? And I just want to say that to everyone. We were born for this time.
We were born for this time. Yeah. And I think, I really, really feel that deeply in my bones. I work with a lot of female leaders who, it's complex, but there is that real charge, that knowing, that intuition, actually, that's rising in so many of us. I'm curious to help some of our sisters that perhaps feel disconnected from that knowing at this time, because, as you said, we are the ones we need, right? We are the answer. I'm just wondering how we help others, how we partner others who are perhaps not quite there yet. Does anybody have any?
Anna, I think you've got the answer on that one. Community.
Oh, I'm not sure I do.
I mean, I think the talking about it is incredibly important. Let's not diminish the talking about it, because the fact is, we're talking about things that hopefully someone's listening going, wow, I completely relate. I'm just wondering what else can we do, particularly as we're all in such different points in our journey. How did you see that in your live events? Were there people that were sort of having more transformational experiences and some that were still opening up, I guess, still unfurling, like, as opposed to in full bloom?
Totally. Do you want to speak to that, Alexandra?
Well, I was quite surprised how everybody who left our event said fun enough, in all 3 countries said one thing, which was that they left with a sense of hope. So I think we're so ready to stand up and do something about it. And I can talk about my own, experience, because until 5 years ago, I was in a very corporate career. And I really have to say that I somehow had to sometimes numb myself, to be able to deal with the bad news of the world, And for me to do what I'm doing now is such a relief, to just not sit and do nothing, because I think that's our heart is bleeding so much. We're so passionate about the world and about humanity, and so. So I think we are all collectively very ready to go ahead. I think it's just a decision, and we have to come together in these, like your festival in summer. We have to come together in those under those circumstances, and just I think it is about coming together, because that's where we get the fire. To light the fire again and go ahead and go out there and do something about it. You, Karen?
Can I add something?
Please, Anna.
Please.
I was just going to say also, women coming together brings a lot of nourishment. I think this is what is important about women coming together. And during this time of the virus, I think what's been so amazing is that there are so many groups available online now that people didn't have access to, or maybe teachers that were so expensive before, but now you can do because they're more affordable, or there's free groups. And what I've also seen is so many women have stepped up during this time to share their gifts, to hold their community through online platforms. So in that way, I feel that it's been both. Women are stepping up more, sharing their passions or their hobbies or spaces, however they want to. There's just been this incredible energy, I think, around that. And so I would say that if there's women out there who do feel disconnected, that there are a lot of resources available to them now more than ever.
I think the other thing, just going back to Alexandra, when you said the interaction workshop, I think the point of Joanna Macy's work and that work that Scylla and I launched was important, because what we saw is that a lot of women in particular had their hearts breaking and filled with despair or apathy and didn't know what they could do to make the world a better place. And that's why we created that workshop. And what came out of it is we would say, here are the statistics of the world. Now listen quietly to the statistics we're about to read you, because they will break your heart. But which one is your calling? So if it's water, if it's poverty, if it's hunger, there are so many things. And when people say to me, oh, I can't find my purpose, I'm like, you're kidding. There is so much available. And so I would invite anyone who's listening is, as I did myself, look to what breaks your heart and go mend it. Go mend it through your compassion, go mend it through your contribution. It's what Gandhi did. It's what many great leaders have done. Martin Luther King, Hilda von Bingen saw visions and revealed stories, and then finally became and acknowledged as a saint, and she changed the world for women in many ways. So look at what breaks your heart and go find an organisation, a community that you can be part of that will heal your heart and many others.
And actually, that's in doing so, you allude to something that we've touched on before, which is this process of grieving and healing, and how we honour that. Not only in taking action, but through perhaps through service also. Do you think, Karen, do you want to say anything about that? Because I know
I definitely think. I mean, part of my life is I've had to watch that I don't do too much, because then I've been burnt out. So there's that combination as well. So I think women have to really watch that, and then you become I've watched that through my own compassion. I'm doing healing out there when I needed to do the healing in here. So it's both. But I think that my own violence that I experienced in my childhood led me to working with the subjugation and marginalisation of women who were sold off as child brides and put into rape camps, because I couldn't take that was okay when I have a daughter and that's okay in my lifetime. And so I still carry them in my heart. And I think our sense of devotion to what we're devoted to bring into the world is really what purpose is. What are you devoted to and what will you give for it? What would we give for our children, all of us, who are mothers or who have watched young children? I give my life for mine.
Yeah, thank you. And how do we regulate our own systems within that, to avoid overgiving or burnout, all of which we probably have all been through a few too many times to learn that hard lesson, which is one can only be in service to others if you are also in service to yourself.
Well, I have a friend like Anna.
Yeah,
she reminds me. It's not about the doing. It's not about the doing, Karen.
That's so yes, so true. We're at 9:05, and gosh, I could chat to you all for ages. I'm wondering whether there are any questions.
So one is, what is Joanna's full name?
Let me just read this one out, which is from Lily. Can you speak on femininity and social media? How do we create value for ourselves in a space engineered by the masculine? Oof. And what are your thoughts on J.K. Rowling's views on gender? Thank you, Lily. I think perhaps if we take, does anyone want to attack the femininity in social media? Can you all see the question in the chat? Okay.
Yeah.
How do we create value?
Can I give it a shot, Remy?
Please do.
So, Lily, thanks for your question. I think just noticing what terms we use. Femininity has a very specific connotation, so we have to be careful about and I hate that I have to say we have to be careful, because you're walking into a context of patriarchy where in the system, women and men can hardly hear what we have to say, which is the point of gaslighting. So I think if you can stand for what you wish to bring into the world and speak from a place of, like I found my voice talking about seasons of the soul and flourishing, because I found a place that I didn't have to push it into people's faces about the feminine. But look what we see. What do you see in Mother Earth? Is that feminine or is that masculine? What do you see when you go into Goldman Sachs? Is that feminine or masculine? I start having these conversations of curiosity and wonder and ask questions. So I think that's one thing I would say is especially on social media, because one can get bullied or shut down or gaslighted. Exactly. So I think for me, it's very much a part of being mindful of the words accurate, not mindful and accurate about what I'm wanting to say and who I'm speaking to. That's for me.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to? I think that's a pretty good answer. Thank you, Karen. Anyone else on social media or J.K. Rowling's views on gender? I have to claim ignorance. I don't know J.K. Rowling's views on gender.
Me too.
Well, I personally, I have to go again because I do. I'm personally, my view is she's speaking inside a context. And if you take away context and just make it this broad sweeping statement she's made and take it personally, I think I could agree with anyone that says it was inappropriate. But I feel that her intent was coming from a good place, that she doesn't want to stop speaking about gender and women's biology and simply transition to transgender and what do you identify with, and who can call themselves a woman if they don't have the biology of a womb and a uterus and a vagina. So she was pointing to something, and I don't think it landed very well, but I do think, myself personally, we have to keep talking about gender because we're not there yet. And someone that identifies as a woman, I can't think of the woman's name. Her first name is Paula. She's got a fabulous TED talk where she speaks about, I've experienced both worlds. And she says at the end of it, I identify as a woman, but I have no idea about the biology of a woman because I'm not that. And she says it with such profound respect that I think that's what I feel about J.K. Rowling. She had a good intent. It just has been out of context, but she was trying to protect the women that are violated in their biology, thousands, millions of them around the world.
Thank you. You know, and again, it probably speaks to the role of media and social media, which is just how quickly something can be taken out of context. Because I think, based on other comments she's made, I would probably agree with you that that's certainly would be my perception of her intent. There's a few others coming in, so I'm just checking my questions in the stars at the end. Regarding the earlier point about domestic abuse and about inequality in general. Thanks, Zach. I previously worked on an educational piece around domestic abuse in the UK. The main target audience for the piece was men who were in a fairly influential position in society in terms of exerting that power to influence situations of domestic abuse for better or worse. A significant proportion of the target audience struggled to identify with women suffering domestic abuse. So I'm just trying to work out.
Particularly.
This was partially generational, as prior to 1992, forced sexual activity within a marriage wasn't illegal in the UK. Can you imagine? My goodness. The piece was about bringing real women's stories to life to help audience identify with them and build empathy and connection. Telling stories is key. But how can we best tell these stories to suppressors as well as potential supporters? That's from Katie Burrows. Thank you, Katie. Lots of comments coming in. Are you ladies okay just to answer a few more questions? We're at 10 past. So
a few more, yeah. I'll have to go at 15,
Yeah, sure. Okay.
I think because I raised it, if it's okay, Remy, I just want to speak to it. I'm sorry. Just to that point, it wasn't until the early 70s that incest was unlawful. And these sorts of statistics that you're speaking to in 1992, forced sexual activity within a marriage wasn't illegal until that time in the UK. I think the laws that get passed are one thing, but I think I had an experience of being in India, and I'm not suggesting this is a strategy. I just want to tell this story quickly. Is after we did our workshop called Vision, Commitment and Action, a woman was being beaten by her husband in the village, and all the other women in the village gathered together and went round and beat the man up and said, if you beat her again, this is what happens to you. Don't do that anymore. Now, I'm not suggesting that for a minute as a strategy, but I'm back in the 90s at that point when that happened. But it was interesting about how when sisters, and I'm thinking we just have to gather as sisters, find out and reveal these private stories and these abuses that get done behind private doors, because the racist protests, the racism and the protests that have happened around George Floyd is because it was in the public. But because this is private, we don't talk about it. So we have to find ways to be able to reveal these stories and identify when these women are happening, this happens to these women. So there's no straight up answer, but speak to the refuge lines, the helplines that are supporting these women.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. I also think there's something around, we need to be able to help people understand what it does to them when they break their codes. So these women, particularly in their stories, when they break their codes of belonging, because of course you move out of this sort of state of innocence. It's as a systemic practitioner, it's something that we look at, you move out of this state of innocence because, even though you're not looking at it, you're not looking at the transgression, you're not looking at the issue, you hold your place and your state of belonging on the basis that everybody's not looking, and the minute that you start to look, you move from that innocence into a place of guilt, which is where the growth happens, right? When you suddenly say, okay, I'm not going to be complicit, or I'm not going to comply with that. And so I think that's a very important movement to enable the storytellers to tell their stories and to actually sense make how that makes one feel when you're moving out of that space of innocence where, you know, you're compromising your state of belonging, which is also quite hard to understand, to think, you know, well, you know, why would one stay within something that's so punishing, that's so brutal, but yet it's incredibly complex. And I think that's something that we have to help storytellers do, because it's part of the movement of growth, that innocence to guilt. And I think that's, yeah, it's another important consideration. Any other thoughts on that question, Anna, Alexandra?
No.
Great, thank you. We are at 15:15 the hour. I'm just checking on any comments. What I would like to say, Josh is, sorry, who was going to, I'm just looking at my phone.
One more question here, which was, how do we restore our full agency to bring us back to ourselves?
Yeah. Who would like to start on that?
I can speak to that initially. I mean, for me, I would say that it's, again, about bringing our center of focus from the mind down into our heart and into our feelings, into our bodies, and really trusting our integrity. And the body is feminine, so really asking yourself, how do I feel, and where do I feel it in my body, and really honoring that, so that I feel when we speak as women, and this is something that I'm practicing at the moment, so is feeling the resonance in my body. So I feel it from my head to my toe, and then I know that I'm speaking my truth. It's a sense of that tingling throughout your whole body. And I think you can really come into your, and again, this is something I'm experimenting and inquiring in within myself at the moment, is the real power for me, I feel, comes when I relate to my body and I relate to my heart. So that's just all I would like to say to that.
Well, I mean, I think that's a very, very important piece for us all to continually work towards as a lifelong project. How do we, to pose the question, how do we come into right relationship with our body such that it can give us the wealth of information that it stores? If you think of what the mind can process, which is, I think it's something, the relativity is like, if the mind can process 20 bits per second, the body can process 2 million. So much activity and information that we've become disconnected from. And so I also too, it's a practice that I think is incredibly important, that we start to notice where else this information is coming from to restore our agency. So thank you for that, Anna. Any other reflections on that?
I think it's very interesting that the two signs of the virus, when someone has the virus, are lack of smell and taste. And Rudolf Steiner said that the sense of smell was intuition. So, and it's also memory. So when we can't smell and it diminishes taste, we're also disconnecting from sense making in the world, as you said, Anna. So I think, being mindful of developing our senses, strengthening them, is ever more important.
Yeah. Well, ladies, two more. I think we're going to have to wrap up. We've got lots of questions.
I'll have to, yeah.
You have to go, Alexandra. It's very late where you are.
Yeah, it's very late where I am. And I thank you so much. Do you want to continue to answer the questions?
It really depends on Karen and Anna. I think it's 9:15. Totally understand if there's no more time. Another question. So we could say goodbye to, before we say goodbye, actually, let's just wrap up. Say goodbye to you, Alexandra. We are receiving so many beautiful messages around Medicine Festival, and it's been a real journey for us. But we are very, very hopeful to be going ahead in August. We are still working with local authorities to ensure that the festival is COVID compliant, that we're really conscious around all of the aspects of healthcare, social distancing, etc., because it's obviously, you know, we're at the vanguard of something very, very new working in this way. So I just wanted to say to anybody that's still listening that we're really hoping, I'm really hoping to do a workshop, as I am Remy, with FemmeQ during the festival, which will be a women's workshop where we can just explore more deeply some of the things that are arising. So all those burning questions, please hold them. And I will certainly be letting you know about our workshop once it's programmed. We're in the process of doing all of that. Zach's just put up that tickets are available at medicinefestival.com. And so, you know, we're very, very excited, but, you know, and working furiously and to get everything ready. But the ladies will be back with me during the festival. So that's just very exciting news. And Alexandra, thank you so much, having come off an intense weekend to be with us.
Totally.
Yeah. I think.
And thank you so much, and very, very happy to be with you in August with Karen and Anna. Absolutely. A delight. Thank you very much.
Such a pleasure.
Good night.
Thank you, Alexandra.
Good night.
Good night, Alexandra. So just the last question, totally understand. The question I have is whether the role of the primary carer being devalued in the face of having a career in some areas is a problem for men and women. Can you see that question? Role of the primary carer being devalued in the face of having a career. Oof, that's a...
Well, I personally think that it's never really been valued. So I don't know about being devalued. I don't think it's ever been valued.
Yeah.
So I know, as a single mother and building a business, I was carer, mother, provider, all of that. So I had to juggle all of that, and no one ever saluted me, really, until recently. Now my daughter's 35, for the great job I was doing. You know, making the choices like you have, Remy, about my child going to a Steiner school and making alternatives that were against the system back in the 80s was very different. But no one ever said bravo for that, Karen. It was always bravo for my business building and my entrepreneurship. So I just feel very disappointed that it's the most critical job of all, and it's just not valued.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Karen. And actually, I'm often pull people up still when someone says, oh yeah, no, I don't know, what did your wife do, or your mum? Oh, she doesn't work, she's a housewife, or she's a stay-at-home mum. I'm like, wow, that is such a full-on job. That is such a full-on job, raising a family, holding together a home. So actually, when I read that question, I also had that response, which is, you know, we need to shift, like so many things, the narrative and the language around the role of mothers in our society, and the role of
that is the medicine, surely, Remy.
Carers of all sorts, actually, not just mothers, carers of all types, for the critical work that they do. There's a big process of reevaluation that needs to happen. So many rich questions and comments. I cannot thank you all enough. Honouring Alexandra, Karen, Anna. For those of you that have enjoyed this session, we will be back. The festival is taking place over the weekend of the 27th to the 31st of August. We're very, very excited. So please do come and support with your open minds and your open hearts and your burning questions. And Medicine Festival. How can we be the medicine for people and planet at this time? You know, really fusing this wisdom that's emerging from the feminine and emerging from Indigenous and all the other places that it's coming into, this hopefully incredible melting pot, this gathering that helps us explore some of the epic questions that we are all holding at this time. And with that, good night, Anna. Good night, Karen. I'll probably see you in the after room if that's okay. And yeah, thank you all for being with us tuning in. Please spread, please share, and yeah, hopefully see you at the end of August.
Thank you, Remy. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Good night.